Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Sam Martino, and I'm really excited to share with you all the process we've been going through for rebuilding some of these 100-year-old tracks for the racing game that we've been building, Rome Montgomery Raceways. But until I jump into that, a little bit about me. I've been doing this for almost 10 years now, which is really crazy to me to think of, but I started making games with my friends back in 2015, and we founded our own studio in April 2016. And since then, I've done 4 game releases. I've worked on tons of different projects, and we won a grant for this AI technology we were working on, which interestingly enough led back to us being able to work on Rome Montgomery Raceways again. So I've got to do a little bit of everything, and it's been a lot of fun. I've really done all different kinds of games and we've been able to move into a lot of different, I would say, it's not just historical projects, but I've worked with a lot of museums trying to do different ways of digitizing all of the things that they have and all the things they want to showcase. And that's opened a lot of doors to some of the bigger projects I've gotten to work on now. I also very excitedly also teach at Bristol Community College in Fall River in Massachusetts. It is such a joy to be able to teach game design to students. I've met such incredible people doing it, and a lot of them actually have worked on some of this stuff for finding all the racetrack stuff. So it's been a lot of fun. I've gotten to include a lot of people. So I want to talk a bit about Rome Montgomery Raceways and how it came to be. But at its core, it is a pre-war racing game that we designed to showcase all of these cars that most of which have been lost to history. And this actually started when I was first starting to make video games. I joined the Facebook group for MH tutorials because that's how I was learning how to 3D model. And I met this artist, John Rayford, and he would model these incredible race cars. Like, they were all pre-war race cars. He'd do the engines and everything. And we ended up becoming friends because I had grown up loving these kinds of cars. My dad and I would go out to California every year for the Pebble Beach car show, and that's all these kinds of cars. And I grew up playing all the Mafia games and all of that. So I fell in love with that era of cars. And John was modeling all of them, and we became friends over the years. And eventually he was like, "Hey Sam, you make video games. Do you want to use all of my car models?" I was, "Oh my goodness, please!" Like, what a dream come true that would be. And so we had these cars, but the problem was this was back in, I think, 2017, 2018 maybe, and it was just we couldn't get it to work. We were using Unreal Engine 4, a 4.8 at the time, and we just could not get the cars to drive properly. If you used Unreal's vehicle system at the time and you put in all the information from these cars, you end up getting wildly incorrect RPMs and gear ratios and all the important technical information. It's all wrong. So we had to shelve it, but we always kept it in our portfolio because it looked really good. This is like one of my favorite live shots we have because the crashes were always incredible. But we always kept all the screenshots in our portfolio because it always looked really good. And years later, Unreal Engine 5 comes out. We're doing a different project for somebody else, and they go through our portfolio and they say, "Oh, what's this? What's this game?" And I say, "Well, it's this pre-war racing game. Like, we want to make that. Like, we'll give you like all this money. We'll like fund everything. We'll make it all happen." And so we pull it all out. We do all this paperwork for it, bring everything back, get it ready for production, and then the day of signing contracts, they ghosted us. And we had all this stuff done, and we said, "You know what? I really believe in this. I think we should see if there's any way we can continue to do this." And so we went out to Pebble Beach that year, and all of the museums we met said, "This is amazing," and they opened their entire collections to us. None of this would be possible without all of these different museums and historical associations that actually preserve all this to make it possible. And as much as I say that like those organizations and associations exist, a lot of the history for these vintage cars and racing history is just, it's lost, truly, a lot of it. And most of the cars either no longer run, the ones that do exist, and most of the tracks don't exist anymore. The first track that I'll showcase here was a wooden board track, And there is not a single example left in the US of the wooden board tracks. So there is literally no way you can experience any of this in person. Another huge issue that we ran into with when building this was that most of the car museums in the United States are privately owned, and a lot of really incredible collections that as soon as the one family member who really cares about it passes away, then the family sells off all the cars and you never see them again. And we've also found that through all of our research as we've been building this game, there are so many moments where world history intertwines with racing history and nobody knows about it. One of the biggest examples and one of the first cars we actually tracked down was Betty Haig's car. Betty Haig was an English racer, and she actually is the only person to have ever won an Olympic gold medal in automotive racing, and she did it against all of the Nazis and all the Germans and all the Italian racers that were sent over to showcase, how great everything was, and she beat them all. And so the whole idea was that Hitler was going to come out and he was going to do a whole celebration, a whole like big thing because they were expecting a German racer to win. And then when they found out it was Betty Haig, they cut the ceremony short. Nobody did anything. She was given her medal and said, leave. And so these are actually photos. Some of the one on the right actually came from the person who currently owns Betty Haig's car, which is the car in the bottom left. And, this is crazy history to me. I had no idea about this. Never heard about this at all. I don't think it's ever been talked about. And I think this is significant beyond racing. So that gets us to the tracks. And as I said, most of them don't exist. The American wooden board tracks are completely gone. There is a tiny section of one still in California. That is the only piece of this that still exists after all this time. And the ones that do even exist are no longer what they once were. The Nuremberg Ring was a big one when we were looking at that. It's, I believe it's 1936, the track is dirt. It's all dirt. And so you would have to you'd have to rebuild it from scratch because you can't use the current Nuremberg Ring track as an example because it's totally different. And all the documentation it's so spotty. Like there's almost nothing. Almost everything that we've been able to find rebuilding these tracks have come from local museums and historical societies that just have books and documents shoved in corners that nobody's touched in years. So what started all this was our first track, and this was the track we actually first tested when we tried to build this back in like 2017. Mike from MH Tutorials actually built the first wooden track that we ever used for that. And it was when we went back to it all those years later, we were trying to figure out exactly what the track was made out of because we didn't know what wood was used, and that was pretty important for the design of it. And there's nothing there because it's all been removed. The only thing really of note near it is there's a horse track that's next to it. And all you can really see is an outline of what the track was. So if you go on like Google Maps, this is what the spot looks like. And it's right next to the Laurel horse track. What's really unfortunate is there used to be a public cricket grounds. And I think pre-COVID, and then once COVID hit, they closed, and now it's going to be turned to condos. So all of this is unfortunately going to be lost. This is all that remains, and you can faintly see there's the outline of the track on the course, but this is really all there was. And so I started reaching out to different groups around the area. I reached out to the Smithsonian because they had one of the cars that raced here. I never heard anything, but the first organization to ever get back to me was the Laurel Historical Society. They had, to my shock, as soon as I emailed them, they sent me back all of these photos of the track. Then they had the original stock offering brochure for when they built the racetrack. That has opened so many doors and answered so many questions that we would be completely unable to find online. It had a map of the track. It had all of the wood they were going to use, everything. And we found that there are when the tracks, when there's no real history of the tracks, the local historical societies have information. There have been so many times that I walk into the town hall of some of these places and there's literally a photo of a race and I say, this isn't online. There is no digital copy of this photo and it's literally sitting in the middle of this town hall. That happens so many times. This is the image from the actual stock brochure, and I mean, this was incredible. This is exactly how we built everything because we had all the information right there. It's actually really funny because we had to go by this, but also from the real life photos, and we found out that I guess maybe they ran out of money, but they never built Grandstand B. That was never there, so we only had to build Grandstand A. But this really helped with trying to do placement and everything, trying to figure out the auto tunnels and all of the rail yards, because when we first did this, one of the biggest issues that we had trying to build this was all of the photos that were online were from the stands. So you were extremely limited in seeing what was around it. And in all of the photos from the stands, the inner car parking was filled. It was filled with cars. And we were always like, well, how did they do it? And you could never see any photos of what the entrance to these areas were. But because of the stock offering brochure, we're able to know there were where the auto tunnels were, and there were pedestrian tunnels, and how they were able to do all of it. These are some more images that we got from the Laurel Historical Society. The one on the left is from the stands. They also did motorbike races there. I truly can't imagine being in the sidecar of that. That sounds terrifying. And then we also have an aerial shot of the track. I'm not sure what year that is, but it's during a race. So you can see all the cars lined up on the inside, and it's a massive track. So we were able to use all of this and all the information to be able to rebuild it. And this was our best attempt to recreate the screenshot, but I realized how big of a difference the angle of where you are is, because I said, wow, that makes our bankings look really extreme, but that is the correct banking for those tracks. It's just from where you stand, where you're in the stands, it looks so much more. But all of this was because we were able to go through all of the photos from the Laurel Historical Society. This would be absolutely impossible to do if it wasn't for them, because they had this just laying around. And like I said, this is still not online. I really should find a place to like post all this. People can see all the stock offering information, because it's really interesting how they did all this. But like I said, all of the props, all of the decorations, everything was able to be built from those photos and that information. And this is the outside part. It's a bit rough because you're not supposed to be out here, but we did the rail line of the road, and everything is painted on the map exactly as it was from those photos. So how do we do that? Well, there used to be a system that I really want to mention because it was fantastic, and it was sponsored by NASA. NASA put it out for free. You could pick any area in the world, and you could grab whatever section of the world you wanted, and from there you would be able to take the height map. I have the link in here. I will share this presentation when everything is done if anybody wants to play around with it. But the one we use is called Manticorp, and it does the exact same thing. The way it works is you go and you grab the section of the map that you want to use as a representation of how it works, and you then it grabs the known geographic height data for that region. And we're using the exact same information that like GIS services use. It's the exact same, we're able to use that same information to translate stuff into video games. It's really interesting because there's so many different ways you can do this, because GIS software is able to track so much. I mean, you can track vegetation levels, tree densities, like, you follow bodies of rivers. And if these are all painted and mapped properly, Unreal Engine can read it and automatically fill your spaces with foliage and trees and water and all the right textures and everything. We actually have it now where it's able to read where cliffs are, and it auto generates the cliff faces for us when we build the landscapes. So you can build really incredible stuff using this data that's supposed to be used for land surveying and different government services, but it has a lot of different uses for video games. Now for us, this one was really interesting. And I'll go more detail into this map when we get there. But we actually found the racetrack was in a different place than where it had thought to have been for the past 80 years. And we were only able to do that because of this technology, which we lined up with we used the old town boundary maps that were provided by the local historical societies, and then we lined that up against modern maps, and that was how we were able to track where the actual track was, and then we used that height data for our maps. So all that height data, like I said, is optimized for Unreal. It's fantastic because it generates the information you need to feed into the landscape tools in Unreal, and it generates everything for you. And then you can modify it to get exactly what you need. We've had to do some scaling issues to get it to look right, especially when you have to take into account things like erosion. But it's really easy to work with, and it gives you a really fantastic starting point. This actually is how it looks in Photoshop, and this is how we kind of show how different parts of it work. But the image on the bottom left is the height map data that is generated from that program, and it's output to us. So when we open it, that's what it looks like. And if you look at the top right, where we have our land map overlaid over the height map overlaid over a Google Maps of where we are. But so we line up everything to find out exactly where this is supposed to be. And you can see how, there's the different little ponds in the map, and you can see where those height differences are in the bottom left. But from here, we really just line up the map, find exactly where the spot is supposed to be, and then that's the area that we use for the track. So when we do the board track, that one I would say for this was the easiest because we didn't have to worry about the landscape didn't have to be 100% perfect. The track was a raised board track, so everything we did was in the model of the track. Most of building the entire thing was pretty much I talked to the local rangers, and because there's a park ranger station out near Laurel, and I asked them, and they gave me all the local foliage, which was pretty easy to find. There's massive libraries for foliage that we've just gotten from Epic over the years. So we have most of those, and then from that point, everything else comes from the stock brochure. That had everything we needed to build this track, and I cannot stress that that was a gold mine. These really rarely exist, and because this is designed to be something that you show to investors to explain exactly how everything works, it has so much information you wouldn't be able to find anywhere else. These are some of the pages from that original stock brochure. And I mean, you can see it was fantastic. We know that the bankings were 45 degrees. We know exactly the dimensions of the joists and the lumber that was used. We also know the kind of wood that was used. All of this was because we had it from the stock offering brochure. And it's also nice because it compares it to other racetracks around the country. So you also use those as examples when you're looking to try and get this right. With the board tracks, it's really, you want to get once you know the dimensions of it, that's the hardest part. And it's nice for building future board tracks because we kind of have an idea of how they were done, and it's just really adjusting bankings. They were mostly the same size. They just had different levels of the bankings around the turn depending on how far you get in history. There was a fun point in time where the belief was that it was safer to not wear a seatbelt because it's better to be ejected from the race car. And this was also the same time when you had 48 degree bankings on racetracks. I think it got up to 50 or even more for some of them, but it was a lot. And so, but building this was not the most complicated, like I said, because we had this. But this is very rare. This is the only time I've ever received this amount of information from one of these tracks. The next one I did was I worked with there's a car museum in Newport, Rhode Island called the Audrain, and they have a really interesting collection of race cars from Willie Vanderbilt, who he was one of the original racers in America. And the story is basically he wanted to race cars in Newport. And so he wanted to order a race car from Renault, and Renault said, well, you can't order only one or two, you need to order a bunch. So he convinced all of his rich friends to buy 13 of them. And so they raced around Newport, and those were some of the earliest races that were in the United States. Now, the very first race that they did was at a horse track called Aquidneck Park, and none of this track exists at all anymore. We were told that it was at the site of the airport, and interestingly enough, that was where I started my search. So I literally would drive to the Newport airport. I spoke to there's a flight school there, and I spoke to them, and they pointed me to there's a like digital archives at the airport at TF Green in Rhode Island. So I drove over there and asked them, and they had no idea. And the reason is because the racetrack is actually not where the airport was. They actually found it was half a mile down the road across the street, and it is now where a grocery store, I think it's a Stop and Shop, is, and it's a parking lot. But I'm really curious. I wonder if you went over with a metal detector of that space, what would you find? Like there is a big, empty lot that's there, and that is where the track used to be. And this was all entirely possible because we had to cross-reference all these photos and maps that we had from these different historical societies. So we got photos from the Newport Historical Society that they had 12 photos, and all of them were taken by one guy who followed the Vanderbilts around in the early 1900s and just took photos of them. And we then used those photos to build the area around the track, and we ended up using all of the town maps that Middletown had to find out exactly where it was. In Middletown, thankfully, I truly cannot stress how wonderful they have been to work with. Like I've worked with really incredible historical institutions all through this. Middletown has really gone out of their way. They dig out all these books. They've like donated books to us. They've like provided so much information. And truly they have all of these original town map records going from 1895 through 1915, and all the information is super valuable to be able to find out where that track actually is. But none of this information has ever been digitized. You can't find any of these photos or information anywhere online. So we had the photos scanned. These are the only 12 photos of that race in 1901 that took place. And I really love these because they showcase a really interesting time in American history. I mean, I love that everybody who's in the stands and visiting has come in horse-drawn carriages, and the only people with cars are the people actually racing on the track. But from these photos, this was how we had to build the entire track. So we knew, okay, there's this shed, there's a farm outbuilding, we know there's this barn house, we know there's this announcer stand. All of this stuff we were able to build because we were able to go through these photos. One of the hardest things actually is there's a farmhouse back here, which I'll talk on in a second, which you think, oh, it's just kind of there, but you see it. When you're going around the bend, you see that farmhouse. So we needed to make sure we got it right. When it comes to building those structures, there's none of them exist, and most of them have been torn down since the 1910s. We were able to find, the records of what wood was used, which was tremendously helpful. And that was again from local rangers. They were able to find out what wood they knew what wood was being used to build those houses. So we went through that, and Middletown had construction records. We went through that. And there's a lot of historical research that goes into this to get it right, but it's necessary because otherwise you're going to miss some really key information that made these tracks what they were. And I mentioned with the farmhouse, that was one of the hardest ones because there are only 3 still standing pre-1900 farmhouses in Rhode Island. And so all the photos we got were there's a goat farm there. And I pulled in one day, and one of the family members was at the store, and I was like, hey, I'm doing this. Can I take photos of the house? And he took me out back, and I got to take photos of the house. Like I got all these photos, and I have texture references for all of it. It was, I mean, of course, the house is over 100 years old at this point, but being able to actually get these photos was incredible. And this was what we used to build the model house that we actually had. You can see it in the back there. That, like I said, it's not front and center, but you see it as you go around the bend. So all the different structures that were here were built and placed based on the photos. And, it's, with the stock brochure, it was really nice because we had an actual map of where things were supposed to go. With this, we had photos, and we pretty much had to put like cameras where the photos would have been and then go around and try to be like, okay, this is where this building would have been. Oh, but what is the distance? Our map artist, this Connor White, he literally would have like, he would use cars and people as measurement. He would be like, okay, this is like 5 carriages away from this distance. And that's literally what we had to do, because there's no accurate mapping of where these things are, especially, you know, people might, there were property lines that marked where the farmhouse was. That was how we even really knew what that was. But nobody marked outbuildings and sheds and stuff like that. So a lot of this was stuff we had to just go off of just the photos, and there were only 12, which led me to the track we're doing right now, which has even less records, if you can believe it. It is a beach race that took place also in Rhode Island at a place called Second Beach. And what I really loved about this was when I went out to Pebble Beach Car Show that year, when the company was supposed to fund us ghosted us, I went to a bunch of museums, and one of them was this museum called the Peterson. And at the Peterson, they had this huge book that's the history of American speedways. This book has a record of every single racetrack that ever existed in North America. It's crazy. So I would literally, whenever we would go on research trips, I would take this book with me, and I'd be like, oh, okay, where's this track? Where's this track? And what's interesting is that there's a footnote that literally just lists that this race was the very first beach race ever held in the United States. I was like, wow, that's really special. Like I had no idea. And it's literally right there in Newport. So again, these are the photos that we're working with. And even these, you know, you can find a couple of them online, but they're really difficult because they're posted in like Facebook groups. I have no idea where people have like gotten these photos, but the ones that I found online were literally posted in Facebook groups for Middletown. These photos actually came from the Middletown Historical Society, who, this is like literally in the top right. This is they had a big print of it, and this is all from them. And they thankfully had these. They also had books that had like little bits of information about it. But this track was really interesting to build because there was just so little information about it. I had to, I wish I could remember the name of it, but I actually had to go down to the library in Newport, and they had one of the, it was this really huge like film reader. Like you had to feed the film reel into the machine, and then you could zoom in on different parts of it, because they had records of all of the newspapers from this time. So I'm going through the Newport newspaper trying to find when this race was, because thankfully we know that this race took place on August 6, 1904. That is when this race happened. And I found it in that newspaper that apparently there was a big event that Newport did called Newport Carnival Days. And during that event, they invited the whole U.S. Navy here. It was this big event that was meant to be like what New Orleans did for Mardi Gras. And it was this week-long party. And the party ended with this big race that had a bunch of the relatives of I think it was like Teddy Roosevelt's brother or some there were some really big people here for this yacht race. And right after the yacht race was this. And they did this, and they had this race. So that's what all these photos are from. And, you know, we're very limited in this. Like, this is extremely limited. There's another photo looking the other direction, and there's one building. And of course, that one building doesn't exist anymore. But again, thanks to the Middletown Historical Society, they have a book that is literally on the historical architecture of the Middletown area. These are so important and so helpful, and it truly upsets me that there are not digital copies of so many of these, because the information in these I can't find anywhere else. The photos are fantastic. Hanging Rock is a huge landmark that you could have seen from the track. I think, yeah, if you see in the bottom left, this is Hanging Rock right here. It's also right here. So it's a huge landmark from the track. And it looks incredibly different today, as I'm sure you can imagine. So being able to have these older photos of it is super helpful. And the same thing with all the house references. This was how we built the homes for this area. We actually were super lucky. When I started teaching at Bristol Community College, I started going to a lot more events, trying to talk with other schools as well. And I met this incredible school called Pixels and Polygons, and they have done such a fantastic job. They've really come and done all the historical research with me. They've gone through all the documents that I've given them, and they've done a really incredible job being able to build off of all of this research that's done, which I think is so incredibly helpful and such a unique skill to have. But it's been incredible, and they were the ones who have made a lot of this possible from all of this stuff. This is really, like, it's been a lot of us having to go out and take a whole bunch of pictures and go and see what these places used to be. This image actually is from this is from St. George's, which is a school that sits right by where Second Beach was, and it looks so different from what it was over 100 years ago. But we have to get these different angles so we can figure out where things were, what you could have seen, what would have been visible from different parts of the beach. And it was a really interesting problem with this track specifically was that there's 100 years worth of erosion. It was really staggering for me when I got to the beach, stood on the beach, looked around and said, I can't see hanging rock. Like, you could, it's very prevalent. Like, you could see it anywhere from the beach. So the spot is just completely gone. Like, where I would have stood, actually the best example, if that bottom left photo, if you see the beginning of where those people are standing on that hill by that tent, that's like around what I was standing on. Like, that's what's left. There's really not a whole lot of the beach left. So because of that, we have to go off of the original maps and then actually model out the beach so that we have what we need for the actual track. On top of that, because you're also on a beach, you don't have the luxuries of a tree line, which all of our other tracks did, so we could hide a lot of stuff behind it, and we can cull a lot of our foliage and the map behind it so the track is less expensive to run. But because it's a beach, you can see very far out. However, Unreal Engine 5 has a really good way of doing oceans, and that's fixed a lot of that problem. And as far as the other way goes, we've got beach grass, and then hanging rock breaks up the rest of the background. So we were able to find ways to do it, but it took a lot of thinking because we can't just fill the area with a massive foliage map. Like, it just would be too expensive for anybody to run, and it wouldn't look very good. And as I said, we had to do a lot of corrections for the sand level. This is a most recent render of the stuff that we've been working on here. And, if you look in the bottom left, you can see how much has been lost compared to the original maps that we're working with. And this is like, there's probably more than this. Like, it is probably more extensive than this. And so this is, we build out the map, and then we go and we have to actually model on the rest of the beach to make sure we get it accurate. This is so important, and I cannot stress, like, that this is something that is worth doing. It's something that when people are like, why? And it's like, well, not only do people like old cars and they like the idea of doing this, but it's something that it's history that we're losing. It really breaks my heart when a museum closes and now nobody can enjoy and learn about what was in there. It's something that it's not a dying industry. There is a constant need for people to work on these cars, and there's not enough people to do them. It's something that Jay Leno comes around all the high schools down in Newport, and he's like, hey, go into mechanics for these cars. We need people to learn how to fix them. Jay Leno's mechanic, she's one of 3 people in the world who's qualified to work on the cars in his collection. So when those people are gone, who's going to work on these cars? And I just feel that there's a lot that can be learned from how these were done, because this is all before computers, before you had any kind of electronics dictating how the cars work. It's all mechanics, all engineering, and you could do anything. We had cars where, like, people took took engines out of downed Zeppelins in World War I and threw it in the car. Like, that was something you could do, and that was innovation for how to make a car. That's something that I think is lost and is something that can really be appreciated. These are a couple of those museums I'm talking about. I just want to share, it's unfortunate because I loved working with both of these. Bottom left is the Zimmerman, which was in LA. That was a museum where you could actually touch the cars, get in the cars, experience all of them. You couldn't do it anywhere else. And the Mullen, the top right, was the largest collection of French cars, and they had an enormous Bugatti collection, all of these French race cars, incredible. And then once he died, the collection was sold off, and it's all been split up among different collectors. I think the biggest is a museum. I think the Peterson got 6 of the cars, and that's the most that I think we're going to see in a museum. So, ending that, if anybody would like to talk more about it or work with us on it, please, please, please reach out. I love this project. This is, I've worked on a bunch of games. I love the projects I've worked on, but this is truly, I'm very passionate about this, and I love being able to do this kind of preservation work. And I'm happy to officially announce here that we have partnered with the Rhode Island Computer Museum as our 501c partner, as they do an incredible job doing technology preservation here. They've also opened up their networks for us so that we can accept donations through them. So building the game, we can focus on getting it right and getting it accurate and making it fun to teach people how these cars work. So if you'd like to support us, there's the link. Thank you so much, everybody. And if there's any questions, I'm here and I'd love to talk about things. Thank you.